There are 6 popular FPL players that I think managers need to avoid going into game week 1. And it's safe to say a couple of these are controversial. So as always, if you look forward to today's video, please do consider dropping a like and of course smashing that subscribe button for daily FPL videos. And enough waffling, let's get into these 6 players to avoid. So first up, before we get into the players, I do need to state that some of these options will be viable picks across the course of the season. This is specifically going into game week 1 and maybe the opening games of the season. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. But the first player on this list, Fabian Schär, is certainly one that won't be an option for game week 1 or any other game week. Unfortunately, he is one of the few players that have been really hurt by a big price hike to 5.5 million. Now, we need to remind ourselves that Fabian Schär is an attacking centre-back who historically has been a brilliant FPL option for our teams and remains a good option in this Newcastle defence. But at 5.5 million, unfortunately, this is just too overpriced for a defender in this team. Now, the opening fixtures for Newcastle are the definition of mixed. Game week 1 is great, but game week 2 against an attacking Bournemouth team isn't ideal. Game week 3 against Spurs isn't great. 4 and 5, I could see clean sheets, I equally couldn't. And then game week 6 is against Man City. So first and foremost, the fixtures aren't even incredible, especially to be paying 5.5 million for Fabian Schär. Next up, the underlying numbers. As I said, this is a goal-scoring centre-back. Don't get me wrong, he does get plenty of opportunities from set pieces. We can see that in the shots per 90, 1.06. Obviously, most of those coming from headers from indirect free kicks or corners. Shots in the box as well, 0.56. So again, this isn't a Trent who's banging them from the edge of the box. He is getting in and around the penalty box with those headers. And you can see here, XG per 90 at 0.07 just isn't fantastic. Yes, he will get you a few goals across the course of the season, but not enough to justify this 5.5 million price tag. The interesting thing, attempted assists at 0.29, whether that is headers down from set pieces or those long raking passes that he does have in his locker. But with the fixtures, with the underlying numbers, it still doesn't justify the 5.5 million price bracket. And the big thing that we need to remember is we have plenty of Newcastle defenders to choose from. Trippier at 6 million, I would much rather go to if he is going to be the go-to right back and pay that extra bit of money. But the big thing about it is we have got Sven Botman, who is going to be ruled out till Christmas at 4.5 million, alongside Dan Burn, Livramento and Lewis Hall. All of those 4 at 4.5 million, a whole 1 million cheaper than Fabian Schär. And I can guarantee sitting here right now that one of those 4 will emerge as a much better value pick than Schär. We just need to monitor preseason to see which one will be, because I feel like Livramento or Lewis Hall will have a breakout season this year. And that is going to be the one to own as opposed to someone like Fabian Schär. So first up, Fabian Schär, and avoid for your game week 1 teams. So the second defender on this list is going to be the man who got the most points from defenders last year in Ben White, who again has had a price hike to 6.5 million. And end of the day, highest point scoring defender in the game does justify a price hike. And I'm not arguing with the price point for him, but I do think there are a couple of reasons why we need to avoid Ben White going into game week 1. Now, whereas Fabian Schär was one that I just think we avoid across the course of the season, I think there might be a time where Ben White does emerge as an option for our teams, but I just cannot sit here and say to you that he is good value going into game week 1. So first and foremost, we need to address these fixtures, because not only Ben White, but also Arsenal defenders in general need to be considered whether they are viable options or not. Game week 1 is brilliant at home against Wolves. Yes, Gary O'Neill did a great job with him last year, but I still would expect Arsenal to get a positive result in the opening game. But after that, game week 2 away against Aston Villa is not ideal at all. Game week 3 against a new team in Brighton with their manager, no idea what that could be. It could be a very attacking Brighton team or a team that is going to take a while to mould to how the manager wants it to be. So very unpredictable game week 3. Beyond that, game week 4, the North London derby against Spurs, not a great fixture. And then game week 5, away against Man City. Yes, game week 6 is good, but 3 of those opening 5 are not ideal for Arsenal defenders. So before we go into anything else, I need to say, not only is Ben White an avoid for game week 1, but could we argue maybe Arsenal defenders in general are an avoid? So next up, As I spoke about, we have seen a price hike in Ben White to 6.5 million. A reminder, centre-back pair in Gabriel and Saliba are coming in at 6 million. And then we have, of course, Ewan Timber coming in at 5.5 million, but no guarantees yet whether he is definitely going to be starting, as we are seeing the recruitment of Calafiori, who obviously played for Italy in the Euros. He can play left-sided centre-back or even left-back. So a little bit of uncertainty about Timber at 5.5 million. But the reason why I think, again, the fixtures and also why Ben White is an avoid is I don't see enough here to justify not only buying a defender for these fixtures, but also paying that price. Expected goals for Ben White was 0.05, which was the exact same as Saliba. And remember, Saliba is 0.5 million cheaper. Yes, the shots are slightly in Ben White's favour, but nothing for me to sit here and be like, oh my God, this guy is absolutely killing it on the numbers. Shots on the box, again, 0.3, but nothing really fantastic per 90 minutes. And as well, being a right back in this team, obviously he has a bit of a creative flair in this side, but 0.14 expected assists per 90. When we put that up against some of the other fullbacks in that league, it is pretty mediocre to say the least. Now, of course, he's been good on bonus points. He's come up clutch in certain games last year where he really did rack up some monster hauls and justifiably the highest scoring defender in the game. But when I look at the numbers for Saliba and Gabriel, Saliba being the second highest point scoring defender, I just look at it and think, I don't see anything here to justify paying 0.5 million more than either Saliba or Gabriel. The reason why Saliba is here just because of the risk of rotation for Gabriel with Calafiori likely to come in. So based on all this, the fixtures, the underlying numbers, the price point, I think Ben White is an avoid for game week 1, but I get it. This one's controversial. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Next up, moving into our first midfielder, and it is going to be Man United's Kobbie Mainoo, one of the stars of the Euros for England, and really surprising me actually how highly owned he is. Now, again, this isn't a player that is 20-30% owned at the time of recording, but he is just below 10%, which really surprised me. Now, coming at 5.5 million, this isn't necessarily the cheapest option. You know, there are 4.5 millions available, like Harry Winks, for example, that we could put fifth midfielder and we could rotate the formation depending on the fixtures. 5.5 million is enough of a price for a midfielder to say to yourself, this either needs to be a rotating midfielder with a forward, or he's a starter in a 5-man midfield for my formation. So I'm quite surprised at this because I haven't looked at Kobbie Mainoo, even though he has come up clutch with some brilliant goals last year, where I think to myself, this is a guy who can consistently deliver attacking returns, because realistically, that's what we want from our midfielders. They're not getting ball recoveries or anything like the Euros. They are there to get assists and goals. And if they can't do that, I don't really care about appearances or, you know, the 1 point clean sheet, which end of the day, Man United weren't keeping many last year. So first and foremost, the fixtures. I mean, similar to Arsenal, I don't look at this and think, I need some sort of Man United investment. Similar to Arsenal, game week 1 is great at home against Fulham with no Polinia. This could be a really high scoring game for Man United if they do click early days. But then game week 2, I spoke about it, Brighton are going to be a very tough team to predict. We really do need to monitor them in pre-season to see what state they will be in. Liverpool in game week 3, not ideal, even though United have done well recently in this fixture. Game week 4 against Southampton, yes, a good fixture. But then Palace away, followed by Spurs. Very mixed bag here. And again, unless you do have a really shrewd rotation with Mainoo with a third forward in your team, I'm starting to look at these fixtures and think, do I really want someone who's playing centre mid in these fixtures? And then we take a look at the underlying numbers. 0.04 XG per 90 is really poor. Obviously, his goals per 90 was 0.14, but you can see he was overperforming, if you can call it that at all. Shots per 90, again, very low volume at 0.51. And importantly as well, shots in the box only 0.23. So we saw a lot of him having long range efforts. A couple of them actually scored from outside the box. So they are scoring low XG chances, which is a little bit of a red flag for me. And he isn't necessarily being a creative force in the team either. 0.03 expected assists. So this is a guy who is a fantastic ball carrier, a brilliant player nonetheless, and he will come up with some goals across the course of the season. I am sure of it. I think he may go between 5 and 7 goals, but 5.5 million, I cannot see it at all. When we're comparing him to other options in the game, like a Hudson-Odoi, for example, I'd be much more excited about him. Hudson-Odoi with Nottingham Forest's great opening fixtures and him playing as part of a front three, than someone like Kobe Mainoo, who may have the responsibility to play more centrally rather than progress into the final third at times, depending on Man United's recruitment. So for that reason, unless I am missing something, I think Kobe Mainoo is not only a void for game week 1, but for the entire course of the season. But again, if I'm missing something, let me know in the comments. Right then, this is the one that I know I am going to get destroyed with in the comment section, so I am ready for it. But Bukayo Saka is going to be a game week 1 avoid. I need to reiterate that because I'm not sitting here saying that Saka is going to be a void for the rest of the season. End of the day, pre-season, we are just looking at those opening maybe 5 or 6 game weeks to analyse which players are viable options, because many will actually come to the top as we progress throughout the season. And I think Saka is going to be one of those players. Now, can I sit here and say to you that Saka isn't a phenomenal FPL option? No, I can't. I think he is one of the top 5 FPL options in midfield in this game. And you can see that with the underlying numbers, which we will come on to now. I've got him in comparison to Odegaard because the first thing I want to state is that it's been a really long season for Saka. Played lots of minutes for Arsenal under Arteta in the league, where Arteta really did lean on him, as England did in the Euros. What we saw, played a lot of minutes. Has only recently gone on his summer holidays, as we will call it. And with the season kicking off in less than a month's time, I'm expecting all these English players like Bukayo Saka, who had a prominent time in that England side, to have an extended leave. Looking at game week 1, thinking to myself, will he be available? And even if he is he Premier League match fit? Because some of these people, like Declan Rice, for example, may take a little bit longer than other players to get up to speed, because at the end of the day, they're going to be cooked after such a big summer. Whereas, where we have a comparison here, Martin Odegaard, who has had literally nothing going on in the summer apart from preparing himself for the Premier League, could be a really nice differential as opposed to Bukayo Saka. And remember, Odegaard 1.5 million cheaper than Saka at 8.5 million. Now, when we look at the underlying numbers, we can see why Saka is the more expensive midfielder in the game. Expected goals 0.49 per 90 compared to Odegaard's 0.21. But we do need to state, of course, that Saka did have penalties on top of this, so his open play XG actually comes a bit closer to that of Martin Odegaard's. Shots per 90, though, naturally leaning towards Saka at 3.34 per 90. But what is quite interesting here is, I think we all associate Odegaard with being the real flair creator in this Arsenal team, but Saka actually had a higher XA, expected assists per 90, than Odegaard at 0.33. But I personally would expect this to naturally move more towards Odegaard as we get into this new season. I just have a feeling that he's going to have a bit more of a creative influence in these opening few fixtures, just because of the likes of Declan Rice, Saka, maybe taking a little bit longer to get up to speed. Odegaard might become that real talisman in this team where he has to drive them through the opening few fixtures. So to conclude, I'm not saying that Saka is an avoid for the whole season, but I think for the opening fixtures, we spoke about these for Arsenal. Game week 1 is fantastic, and even though game week 3 is unpredictable, I think it might be good for attackers. Game week 4, game week 5, not ideal at all. And when I do break it down, I think to myself, am I actually that desperate to pay 10 million for someone like Bukayo Saka with tough games in game week 2, game week 4, game week 5, when I could pay 0.5 million less and get a Phil Foden who will equally be as rested as Saka, with what I mean by rested is limited rest time, or get someone like Cole Palmer, 0.5 million more? For me, I think Saka is an avoid for game week 1. I know it's controversial. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd be really interested to know where the community are thinking about Saka right now. So moving into the forwards, and Tony is going to be our first man to avoid for game week 1, but for a few different reasons to the other reasons I spoke about on different players. Tony coming in at 7.5 million, I think is a really, really great price. I think it's actually fantastic value for the game. Of course, when we're looking at Tony of last season, very, very difficult to assess this season because he missed half of it due to the betting scandal. Came back, obviously had a decent back end, but then a lot of rumours about leaving the club clearly had an impact on not only his game time, but his influence on the team. So I'm not really looking too much on Tony of last season because it was very difficult to predict with such limited minutes played. But the main reason why I am avoiding Tony for game week 1 is because of the uncertainty of what is going on with him right now. As we spoke about with Tony, a lot of rumours about him going to different clubs. Some of the front runners have obviously dipped off with the attraction of bringing him in. So it could very much be a last minute deal for Tony. And when we're buying players for game week 1, we don't want to be buying them with the risk of them leaving the teams, going to another side where he's a massive rotation risk. Take Arsenal, for example. If he was to get a deadline day move to Arsenal, while that sounds fantastic, we're going from a talismanic man who takes penalties at 7.5 million to a potential rotation risk at Arsenal who also might not be on penalties because he won't be on the field. So this is very difficult to assess right now. If he is a starter for Brentford and they put all their things aside and he starts every week, then obviously 7.5 million is incredible value. But I think because of the fixtures coming up, game week 2 away against Liverpool, game week 4, game week 5, both away against City and Spurs, we have enough of a reason to completely avoid Ivan Toney. Let the transfer window do its thing, and then we can reassess whether Toney is a viable FPL option for our sides. What I want to do is bring up the underlying numbers for Toney and Johan Visser, because if Toney is to move, of course they have recruited their new man, but Visser's game time I think will still be decent for them. He really was a big player for them last year in the absence of Toney, and I really do think in terms of finishers, Visser is right up there as one of the best. It's just his minutes, he does usually come off quite early, but if Toney does get his move, just wanted to cover a little bit for Visser because he is only 6 million on the game. So in terms of XG, Visser and Toney neck and neck at 0.43. But you can see Visser really keeping up with his expected goals with goals per 90 at 0.43. So he really is a clinical finisher. The shot's slightly more in Toney's favour, but obviously the expected assist slightly in Visser's favour. But you can see it there, very, very little between it. So Toney's an avoid. Absolutely for game week 1. Even if we get confirmation that he's going to be playing for Brentford this year, the fixtures show us that we just let him be on the sidelines for the opening 5-6 game weeks, and then we can reassess him as a fantasy option. But if he does move, maybe Visser could be a consideration for our teams as a bit of a differential. Again, let me know your thoughts on Toney. I think this is quite an obvious avoid, but I'm quite surprised a lot of managers have him in their teams. So the final player that you need to avoid for game week 1 is going to be arguably the most informed player at the back end of last season in Crystal Palace's Mateta. Now, this guy decimated my rank at the back end of last year. Everything he hit went in. He was ridiculous alongside Elise and Eze. Now, first thing we need to note, of course, is his price point is 7.5 million, justifiably increased because he really did prove himself as a Premier League forward. We need to understand as FPL managers whether that was a purple patch or whether that can be sustained over the course of the season. And of course, we also need to understand that they are missing a big part of that attack going into this year with Michael Elise departing for Bayern Munich and also Eze rumoured to be leaving, but no guarantees on that one right now. The other huge caveat that we need to talk about with Mateta, and the main reason why he is going to be a complete avoid and why I think the 10% of managers that currently have them teams need to get rid of him ASAP, is because of his involvement in the Olympics. He has been selected for the French team and they are obviously quite fancy to progress quite deep into this Olympics. And if they were to progress to the gold medal match, the final of course, that is going to be happening on the 9th of August. And with the season kicking off on the 16th of August, he is going to be away for the entire summer. So there will be then an expectation for him to have a bit of a rest and then get himself up to speed with the Premier League. And for that reason alone, it is why he has to be an avoid for your teams. I don't really understand why 10% of managers have him in their teams unless they really don't know about the Olympics involvement. And that is enough of a reason. Now, alongside that, the fixtures are a little bit tricky. Brentford away is always a tough game. Game weeks 2 and 4 are great, but 3 away against Chelsea, 5 at home against United, even 6 away against Everton really isn't ideal. And the expectation, if they were to get into the final, we might see Mateta return around game weeks 3, 4, 5. But even then, I think that's the perfect opportunity to just sit back, have him on your radar, analyse to see whether he is going to take a few months to get back up to speed or whether he hits the ground running once again, what we saw at the back end of last season. We can see with the underlying numbers, of course, not the most minutes, but he still played pretty much half of a campaign. So it was a decent sample size for us to go off. 0.41 XG per 90, and you can see his finishing, 0.63 actual goals per 90. So he really was on fire at the back end of last season. Shots per 90, not as huge volume as I was expecting at 1.8, but enough. And again, we're not really seeing a chance creator yet. Expected assist pretty low, but whenever I'm buying a forward, I just want to see that he is getting the most chances, and he really was in this Crystal Palace team. But because of the Olympics, because of those opening fixtures, even because of the absence of Michael Elise, a lot of problems with Mateta, and that is the reason why he is an avoid for game week 1, but certainly a player that will come into our teams later on in the season if he can reignite that goal scoring form that we saw last season. But Mateta is going to make up the 6th and final player that you need to avoid for game week 1. Yes, guys, okay, so that's going to wrap up the 6 players that you need to avoid for game week 1. I really hope that has given you a little bit of food for thought. I know there are a couple of players there, like Bukayo Saka, there is a little bit of controversial, but I hope my reason is at least justifiable, even if it isn't the same conclusion that you come to. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please do drop a like just to show that you did enjoy it. And of course, if you want to stick around for the preseason and this year, make sure you do smash that subscribe button. And of course, I would love to hear in the comment section, what are the players that you think need to be avoided for game week 1? Let me know in the comments. As always, have an amazing day. Take care, and I'll see you really, really soon. Cheers.